Hi, everyone. I'm here with Yves Greijn. I can't quite pronounce it, but I've tried my best. I'm not Dutch, of course. And we're going to be talking about recruiter enablement. So, Yves, thank you very much for taking the time to join me today. Give us a quick introduction to you and your background.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me here today. So, correct, you did pronounce my name very well, actually. My name is Yves Greijn. I am working out of my own company called Maven, largely focused on executive engineering hiring. I have spent a good amount of years in the technology space, worked at startups and also sold them, worked in FANG, the Facebooks and Uber on chief executive hiring, let's say, in the engineering space, and just came out of a lengthy engagement with Miro, a whiteboard collaboration platform, where I was also responsible for executive hiring in the technical space.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so you've seen recruiter enablement like from a variety of different angles, I guess, and some of the best examples of how to equip your recruiters with what they need to do their jobs come from the tech sector. I think that's because engineers are good at things like DevOps and sales enablement and things like that. So interested to know, like, what is recruiter enablement to you?
I think there's a couple of factors that are important. There's some that rely on how do I get things done from my own internal sphere of influence. What are the tools that I have to work with? An ATS is, of course, an important one. And what can we automate there? But there's another factor, and there's actually a large factor in there, is that a lot of us probably in recruiting who want to find right candidates for our positions don't rely on them to apply for the role. No matter where macroeconomics now are, and lots of people are, especially in the tech sphere, are applying. You want to find the right candidates, so probably you'll do a lot of proactive work for it as well. So you can, given the nature of recruiting and given how repetitive that work can be, up to the point of you actually starting interviews with people, I think enablement is a huge topic. And whether you're specifically a sourcer who hands over to a recruiter, or whether you are a full cycle recruiter or you are a recruiter and you rely on sources, I think there's a lot of elements that you can do to make a more efficient work life. So specifically on the sourcing side, I think there's a lot of stuff around data management and letting data work for you at scale. So I see a lot of recruiters who still rely on the algorithms that LinkedIn will throw at them, or looking at one profile at a time and go, that looks like a great profile, and maybe looked at the also viewed. I tend to look at things a little differently and go, what if the data that I want to see is Europe, and I want to actually know the first and the last soul that lived there? How can I get that data out to me as quickly as possible, analyze that data accordingly, and then start to look at patterns in a person? So what are my data markers that make me think a person could be ergo it be has been successful in a big leadership role 3 times over for more than 18 months? Because probably if you're there any under that time, you have been asked to vacate the premises, or there has been something else. But let's say you see consistent patterns of people who have been joining small companies and made them into a success in big titles, or you have had people who have joined big engineering functions before and have been in a very mission critical role and have been around for a while, and you kind of do the reading around these companies on what makes a success and what does not. If you look at the patterns in that data, you can identify a lot of that and take a huge amount of workload out of the sourcing part of your business. And if you manage that data well and you get to automating your funnel a bit better, you can actually look at how can I tie who I want to reach out to a pitch document that I have written, send them out, so you know who is actually getting that email, who is getting that pitch document of mine, who is doing the opening and the reading, and then who is booking time with me. You can actually automate almost everything in that portion of your work. And then where you step in and where it gets less efficient is maybe the point where somebody says, I want to have a chat with you and I booked some time with you. Let's have a conversation. And that is where you start to rely on a lot more stuff, because now you have to like really actively start to engage with an ATS and other stakeholders in the business and scheduling that doesn't rely on your own agenda, so you can't get away with just your Calendly, but you have to rely on other tooling. So I think probably that's when you'll probably have some questions for me, but that's sort of what I think about out of my work.
I mean, yeah, you've just covered a lot of different subjects there, and like what you've outlined is almost a best practice. Here's how to go and do it. Now, not everybody is Yves, right? So how do we kind of standardize some of this so that, and how do we automate it? How do we standardize it? How do we make sure that people have got templates and they've got like, okay, do this, then do this, then do this, rather than, well, I've got lots of different, I'm going to use artistic, creative thinking around all of this. We want to do it the best way. So how do we sort of standardize things?
I think that first what you need to understand about your workflow is what is the recurrence in my work and where do I lose time? And where do I think that if I repeat this over and over, and if I start to take some proper notes, usually this comes down to a leveling system for roles. If you work in the leadership space, or we all know the big technology companies and their leveling systems, maybe, right? So my world starts at principal engineer for Amazon, senior staff at Google, an E7 at Facebook, ICT 6 at Apple. We can go on. If you know what this leveling portion looks like, and you know that you're reviewing profiles all day, what would be interesting is to figure out what are the facets of a profile that make me quickly identify if they're borderline hitting that level, if they are probably have done some cycles successfully in that role, so they're probably not going to get down levels for my client. So all these things I look at and I just score them, and I have it not necessarily out in a blueprint in front of me. I have it in my head over the years. But if you're new to this, it probably works to identify what do I myself in my work and my client, my stakeholder in the business, my hiring manager, etc., value, and what do we agree upon is important. If you have that as a first outline and you go to market, before you even start to think about automation of your sourcing work itself, you're going to save a lot of time because you're not going to guess on what somebody else is going to think is important. You're going to know, and you're going to hold yourself into that same bar. Same thing when you screen candidates, is you can hop on a call because you're on the go and you have a great insightful call with somebody. But what I like to do is, if we're going to go for a certain role, a certain level, I'm going to ask everybody almost the exact same questions. And the core questions in my call are exactly the same. Why? When I export this data, because let's say not all roles I'll hire tomorrow, so some of them will be really tricky. I will want to do a debrief at one point in time, because most roles that I work on are quite visible to board level functions, etc. People want to know the reasons behind it. So when I look at all my data, I tend to quantify a lot of the data and take it out of the qualifying aspects. Maybe that's your link towards more artistic ways of doing things. I like to rely on a lot of data, and in my technical line of work and the type of stakeholders I work with, that sort of seems to be the way on how they like to work with me also. You can then look at the exact same thing on when you send emails. How many of them do you send out? What's the return on investment for all of them? How long does it take for people to get back to you? And then when you get them not only screened but turned into a candidate, how do they perform throughout your interview funnel? Who is converting well from the first deep technical interview versus other sources of hires, both to identify how well am I doing versus an average other avenue like the people who are applying or referrals. You want to find data points throughout a funnel, all the way from the homework that you need to do to start reaching out to somebody, all the way to when they land in the funnel to go, and this is my personal preference and something I care deeply about, I want to make sure that I convert the very best. I need to be in a number one spot, up to the point where I can't really influence it that much anymore, going, there will always be a bunch of candidates that might not make it for various other reasons or might not want to join us, but I want to make sure that that quality coming into the funnel is really high, because otherwise, what is the purpose of me as an IC who gets hired to do some specific work on very senior mission critical work roles? I could have been replaced by something else, a system, something else. But because these parties don't meet each other, there needs to be a connecting factor that is in the end still a human. I probably think that if we go into more the artificial intelligence space, that always very senior hiring will always have an element of human connectors. By the way, that's my company name, Maven. It's part from the Malcolm Gladwell book, and it basically comes down to being a digital connector. I do believe that that's always around. So how do you optimize elements and facets around your work so you could create the most velocity possible and cover the most ground as one FTE, me? And where do I have more time then to spend on having serious conversations, asking all the hard questions to both my hiring partners and my candidates, so I can get quality into the funnel?
So I believe the area of recruiting that you work in is one of those that is least likely to be fully automated. There's a lot of emotional intelligence and ability to influence people that's required in what you're doing. And I think it's quite difficult to emulate that with technology. However, I do see when people leave talent acquisition teams and they've been doing an exec resourcing or sourcing or TA role, they take a lot of intelligence with them when they walk out the door. How you've worked in some of the very biggest, including the FANG companies. How should companies go about making sure that when somebody leaves, they're actually leaving 80% of their knowledge, they're not taking 80% of their knowledge?
I agree. And that's actually a very true statement that you're making. And I do see it often when I'm also in a client engagement as well. It's not the business function that won't understand the work that you're doing and how data focused that is. It's often the recruiting environment around that struggles a little bit with, oh, that's a bunch of data that's not coming my way. That's not really the way I'm doing things. So standardization for the way you do your work and explaining this early on is probably expected of somebody as either a contractor or somebody you hire externally. But also, if you want to make sure your client becomes better at something, you're part of a team as much as an expert. So you want to make sure that you embed some of these practices. Some people are a little bit scared by it, but overall, especially when you get to FANG type of companies, these people who are there in these teams, they're actually very much interested in it as well. So embedding some of your work, maybe not to the nth degree that you will do it for your own project, but trying to find the maturity phase of where does this team currently sit? How can I leave this place in a better state than when I found it coming into a role? How can I educate some people around it? So it doesn't really, because honestly, it's all nice and dandy that stuff might rely on you, like we need Yves in order to help hire these roles. That's fun for a while, but that gets old at one point. So you kind of want to leave a place where for the majority of roles, people are much more efficient in doing their work and can have much more meaningful conversations with their business stakeholders about where things go south. And it's very much something you can put into process and procedure, that you can mentor people around. Sometimes a lot of the requests around my work, if you're not working your own roles, let's try and give training. Let's try and put people in that same mindset. And that's doable. The only thing what's probably less doable is the specific type of CTO request work that I have to do that is deep technical in nature. And not everybody takes the interest to go to the nth degree to understand those domains and how it all works together. That's okay. It's fine if somebody can, sit next to me, even if it's digitally, and see how I do my work. That's fine. But you'll never get that straight copy. But you have to find your milestones of, if I make a team of 60 or 80-odd folks 5 to 10% better even, and that's a bit low, I hope a little bit more, but that's a huge change for tomorrow, and that's a huge change come year 2, year 3 for that business. And that's when I feel as a contractor that I've delivered more value than just a few roles that I hired. Because that's great, that's what they want me to do, but you can do a little bit more, and that's also much more fun to do your work. If you don't do it, it can be a little bit isolated as well. And often people don't know what goes on in exec hiring, so often the recruiting managers of large organizations will invite me to give a training or to give more context to what it is, how this work goes. And from an internal leadership or career perspective also in L&D, what does a recruiter go to? There's various directions that you can take if you don't want to go into management. I've been in management earlier on in my career, and I realized that it's probably not where I want to be. I'm more of a TLM type profile, but more TL than an M. Yeah. I want to enable people. I want to unblock people. And in the software world, that's definitely in the IC track, where you're senior in your field. You like to technically be responsible for more complex processes and procedures going out. But you want to make sure that you enable other people. And that's sort of how I see myself as well now.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yves, it's been great to learn from you. A lot of that's been fascinating. And we've talked about things that I don't think in 120 plus interviews, I don't think some of the things we've talked about today, I don't think we've covered in any of the others. So it's wonderful. You've added to this body of knowledge, and thank you very much. How do people find you?
LinkedIn, maybe, because we're all there. And otherwise, what did I say? Well, maybe yves.greijn@mavenheadhunting.com is definitely another avenue. But connect with me on LinkedIn, ask your questions. I'm more than happy to share some knowledge there. I do believe in that karma of give it a little and thou shalt receive in the long term.
Yeah, so do I. Okay, wonderful. Yves, thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, Adam.